Today, when we think of marching for civil rights, images of Martin Luther King and the March on Washington come to mind. But some of the earliest civil rights activists had a different idea. During the Civil War, the African Americans marching for civil rights were soldiers. In decades before the Civil War, most African Americans were enslaved. Even those who were free were denied the rights of citizenship, such as the right to vote and the right to testify in court. African Americans who were working to change the situation had to ask for help from white Americans who held these rights. People who tried to demand their rights were considered agitators or criminals. Serving in the military is also a right and a duty of American citizenship, but African Americans were officially barred from the armed services until the Civil War. As late as 1862, many whites in the United States wanted to deny blacks the opportunity to serve. But when thousands of white Americans were dying on the battlefields of the Civil War, Northern whites changed their minds and the Army began accepting black soldiers.
I'd rather see them killed off than so many of the white folk. Wouldn't you? Iowan Jeff Hogue.
For African Americans, the war was a chance to end slavery and seize their civil rights. African Americans, both slave and free, were anxious to offer up their service and, if need be, their blood for these noble purposes. Civil rights leader Frederick Douglass recognized that military service was the key to demanding citizenship, and he urged his fellow African Americans to enlist.
Once let a black man get upon his person the brass letters U.S. Let him get an eagle on his button, and a musket on his shoulder, and bullets in his pocket, and there is no power on earth which can deny that he has earned the right to citizenship in the United States. Frederick Douglass.
As soon as the war was over, the soldiers moved to capitalize on their service and demand their civil rights. Isaac Newton Triplett, a sergeant in Iowa's 60th U.S. Colored Troops, penned one of the most eloquent statements the troops made.
We, the soldiers of the 60th U.S. Infantry, having returned home from the battlefield, and feeling conscious that we have discharged our duty as soldiers in defense of our country, respectfully urge that it is the duty of Iowa to allow us the use of our votes at the polls, believing that he who is worthy to be trusted with the musket can and ought to be trusted with the ballot.
Triplett and the 60th were victorious in their fight for civil rights. African American males gained the right to vote in Iowa in 1868. The soldiers' demand for their civil rights rang out across the nation, and for the first time the government answered them. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, which abolished slavery and ensured civil rights and voting rights for all Americans, were passed within 5 years after the end of the war, as a result of the demands of African American servicemen. We all owe our civil rights, in some part, to these brave Americans.